He was a successful tech entrepreneur who could solve any problem with code and logic, but when it came to his teenage son's mysterious illness, he was utterly helpless. The doctors couldn't find what was wrong, the specialists were baffled, and his son was wasting away before his eyes. Then she arrived, a young woman barely out of college, with no medical training, just a gentle demeanor and an unusual request to work without supervision. What the hidden security cameras captured would shatter everything he thought he knew about trust, healing, and the power of human connection. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Marcus Chen had built his software company from nothing, turning late nights in his garage into a Silicon Valley success story worth $200 million. His algorithms powered everything from banking systems to social media platforms, and tech magazines called him the man who could predict the future through data. But sitting in the sterile waiting room of Stanford Medical Center at 2 a.m., watching his 17-year-old son Daniel sleep fitfully on the hospital bed, Marcus felt like the most powerless man alive. Daniel had been sick for 8 months now. It started with fatigue that the family dismissed as typical teenage laziness. Then came the joint pain, the mysterious rashes that appeared and disappeared without pattern, the cognitive fog that made his straight-A son forget simple words mid-sentence. The weight loss was the most terrifying part. Daniel had dropped. From 165 pounds to 128, his athletic frame now gaunt and fragile. "We've run every test imaginable," Dr. Sarah Winters had told Marcus just hours earlier, her voice heavy with the kind of frustration that comes from medical expertise meeting its limits. Autoimmune panels, infectious disease screenings, neurological workups, even rare genetic disorders. Everything comes back normal or inconclusive. Marcus stared at the wall of his son's hospital room, decorated with get-well cards from classmates and teammates from the varsity soccer team. Daniel could no longer play for. The irony wasn't lost on him. He spent his days solving complex problems with elegant solutions, but his own son was a puzzle with missing pieces. The Chen family lived in a sprawling modern home in Palo Alto, all glass and steel and carefully curated minimalism. After Daniel's mother, Elena, had died in a skiing accident 3 years earlier, Marcus had thrown himself into work, while Daniel threw himself into sports and academics. They had found a rhythm, a way to navigate grief without dwelling in it, but now, with Daniel's inexplicable illness consuming their lives, that careful balance had shattered. "Dad." Daniel's voice was barely a whisper as he stirred awake. "Did they find anything this time?" Marcus moved to his son's bedside, noting how Daniel's once bright brown eyes had dulled to the color of old coffee. "Still running some tests, kiddo. Dr. Winters wants to keep you another day for observation." Daniel nodded weakly, then closed his eyes again. Marcus watched his chest rise and fall, counting each breath like a prayer. In the 8 months since Daniel had gotten sick, Marcus had transformed from a confident CEO into an anxious researcher, spending sleepless nights scouring medical journals and alternative treatment forums. He'd consulted specialists from Johns Hopkins to Mayo Clinic, flown in experts from Germany and Switzerland. Nothing. The breaking point came on a Tuesday morning in March. Marcus found Daniel collapsed in the hallway of their home, unconscious and burning with fever. The ambulance ride to the hospital was the longest 20 minutes of Marcus's life, watching paramedics work over his son while city lights blurred past the windows. "His body is fighting something," the ER doctor explained later, "but we can't identify what. It's like his immune system is at war with an invisible enemy." That night, as Marcus sat in his home office surrounded by medical reports and empty coffee cups, his phone buzzed with a text from his assistant, Jennifer. "Saw your posts in the online support groups. My cousin went through something similar with her daughter, ended up finding help through an unconventional source, a young woman who specializes in holistic care for complex cases. No medical degree, but she has an incredible track record. Want me to reach out? Marcus stared at the message. He had always been skeptical of alternative medicine, preferring data and peer-reviewed studies to testimonials and anecdotes. But watching his son deteriorate while conventional medicine offered no answers had opened his mind to possibilities he would have dismissed months earlier. "Send me her information," he typed back. The next morning, Jennifer forwarded him a simple email thread. The young woman's name was Isabella Santos, 24 years old, originally from a small town in Northern California. Her background was unconventional. She had studied environmental science at UC Berkeley, but had spent the last 3 years working with families dealing with chronic illnesses that defied easy diagnosis. Her references were glowing, but came from ordinary people, not medical institutions. "I don't promise miracles," her initial email read. "I just believe that healing sometimes requires looking at the whole person, not just their symptoms. I'd be happy to meet with you and your son, with no expectations or commitments." Marcus found himself staring at her photo, a young Latina woman with kind eyes and an understated smile. She looked barely older than Daniel, and certainly nothing like the seasoned medical professionals who had been unable to help his son. But something in her straightforward approach resonated with him. The meeting was arranged for the following Thursday. Marcus had prepared a comprehensive briefing: Daniel's complete medical history, test results, symptom timeline, and treatment attempts. He expected Isabella to request copies of everything, to study the data as any serious practitioner would. Instead, when she arrived at their Palo Alto home, she spent the first hour simply talking with Daniel. Not about his illness, but about his interests, his favorite subjects in school, what he missed most about his old life. Marcus watched from the kitchen, simultaneously impressed by her easy rapport with his son and frustrated by what seemed like a waste of valuable time. "Your son is very tired," Isabella told Marcus afterward as they stood in his study. "Not just physically. He's exhausted from being seen as a collection of symptoms instead of a person." Marcus bristled slightly. "I can assure you that every doctor we've seen has treated Daniel with complete professionalism and care." Isabella nodded diplomatically. "I'm sure they have. But sometimes when we're searching so hard for what's wrong, we stop seeing what's still right." She paused, choosing her words carefully. "I'd like to spend some time with Daniel, not as a patient, but as a person who happens to be dealing with health challenges. Sometimes healing starts with remembering who we are beyond our illness." The proposal was unconventional, even risky. Isabella wanted to spend several hours a day with Daniel, helping him with daily activities, engaging in gentle movement and breathing exercises, preparing nutrient-dense meals together. She wasn't offering a cure or even a diagnosis. She was offering presence. "I understand you might want to monitor the situation," Isabella said, glancing around the obviously well-appointed home. "I'm comfortable with whatever oversight makes you feel secure." Marcus found himself thinking about the comprehensive security, the system he'd installed after Elena's death. Cameras in every common area, motion sensors, environmental monitoring. He had originally intended it for basic home security, but it had evolved into something more extensive. The idea of having a detailed record of Isabella's interactions with Daniel actually appealed to his analytical nature. "We can try it for 2 weeks, Marcus said finally. "See how Daniel responds." Isabella smiled, and for the first time in months, Marcus felt something that might have been hope. The first day Isabella came to work, Marcus watched from his home office as she moved through the house with quiet confidence. She didn't immediately try to engage Daniel in activities or conversations about his health. Instead, she simply made herself available, reading quietly in the living room while Daniel played video games, preparing simple snacks when he showed. any appetite, offering gentle companionship without pressure. It was such a stark contrast to the constant medical appointments, the urgent consultations, the sense that every moment was a crisis requiring immediate intervention. Isabella brought a quality Marcus hadn't realized was missing from their home: normalcy. By the end of the first week, Daniel was spending more time outside his room, not because Isabella insisted, but because her calm presence made the common areas feel less charged with anxiety. Marcus found himself reviewing the security footage each evening, not out of suspicion, but out of genuine curiosity about what Isabella was doing that seemed to be making a difference. The answer, he realized, was deceptively simple. She was treating Daniel like a 17-year-old who happened to be sick, rather than a sick person who happened to be 17. The distinction seemed minor, but its impact was profound. As the second week began, Marcus noticed changes in Daniel that went beyond the subtle improvements in mood and energy. His son was asking questions again, expressing opinions, even complaining about things, normal teenage behaviors that had disappeared during the months of illness. For the first time since this nightmare began, Daniel seemed to be reclaiming pieces of himself, but it was also during this second week that Marcus began to notice things in the security footage that didn't quite add up. Small discrepancies in Isabella's story, moments when she thought she was unobserved that revealed a different side of her character. The question that would soon consume Marcus's thoughts was taking shape. Was Isabella exactly what she appeared to be? Or was there something more complex, perhaps even dangerous, hidden beneath her gentle exterior? Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The third week brought the first real breakthrough, though Marcus almost missed it entirely. He was in back-to-back video conferences with investors in Tokyo when Daniel appeared in his office doorway, not the usual shuffling entrance of someone seeking permission to interrupt, but a confident stride that Marcus hadn't seen in months. "Dad, Isabella and I are going to the farmer's market," Daniel announced. "She says the vendors there have better produce than the grocery stores, and she wants to teach me how to pick out ingredients for this soup recipe." Marcus blinked, momentarily speechless. Daniel hadn't voluntarily left the house for anything non-medical in over 6 months. The farmer's market was a 20-minute drive, would involve walking, standing, interacting with strangers, all activities that had become monumental challenges during his illness. "Are you sure you're feeling up to it?" Marcus asked, his protective instincts immediately flaring. "I'm tired of feeling like a prisoner in my own body," Daniel replied, and the clarity in his voice was startling. "Isabella says sometimes we have to practice being well before we actually are well." Marcus glanced past his son to where Isabella stood in the hallway, giving him a small, encouraging nod. She was wearing jeans and a simple green sweater, her dark hair pulled back in a ponytail. She looked even younger than her 24 years, certainly not like someone qualified to make decisions about his medically fragile son's activities. But Daniel's eyes held a spark that Marcus hadn't seen since before the illness began. Against his better judgment, he found himself nodding. "Take your phone, call if you need anything, and don't overdo it." After they left, Marcus found himself unable to concentrate on work. He pulled up the security app on his phone, scrolling through the morning's footage of Isabella and Daniel in the kitchen. What he saw challenged every assumption he'd made about illness and recovery. Isabella hadn't simply prepared food for Daniel, she had engaged him as an active participant. The cameras showed them moving around the kitchen together. Isabella patiently teaching Daniel to properly wash vegetables, explaining the nutritional properties of different ingredients, asking for his input on flavors and preparations. Daniel's movements were still careful and deliberate, but there was purpose in them. More remarkably, Daniel was talking. Not the monosyllabic responses Marcus had grown accustomed to, but actual conversation. He was asking questions, making jokes, even playfully arguing with Isabella about whether cilantro actually tasted like soap to some people. Marcus realized he hadn't heard his son laugh in 8 months until he watched that footage. When they returned from the farmer's market, Daniel was clearly exhausted, but also animated in a way that alarmed and delighted Marcus in equal measure. He insisted on showing his father the ingredients they'd selected, explaining Isabella's philosophy about eating foods that were alive with nutrients rather than processed into sterility. "She says my body might be confused about what's food and what's not," Daniel explained, carefully arranging rainbow-charred and heirloom tomatoes on the kitchen counter. "That maybe if I eat things that are obviously healthy and alive, it might help my immune system remember what it's supposed to do." Marcus felt a familiar surge of skepticism. This sounded dangerously close to the kind of pseudo-scientific thinking he'd encountered in online forums. Desperate parents grasping for simple explanations to complex medical mysteries. But watching Daniel's genuine enthusiasm was undeniable. That evening, as Isabella prepared to leave, Marcus asked to speak with her privately. "I appreciate what you're doing," he began carefully, "but I need to understand your approach better. Daniel seems to be responding well, but I want to make sure we're not overlooking anything important." Isabella nodded thoughtfully. "You mean you want to make sure I'm not some kind of charlatan who's going to convince your son that kale smoothies will cure whatever's making him sick?" Her directness caught Marcus off guard. "I wouldn't have put it quite so bluntly, but yes." "Good," Isabella said. "That means you're being a responsible parent. Here's what I can tell you. I don't know what's wrong with Daniel medically. I'm not qualified to diagnose or treat his condition. What I do know is that chronic illness, especially mysterious chronic illness, can create a cycle where the person's entire identity becomes wrapped up in being sick." She paused, choosing her words carefully. "Daniel has spent 8 months being poked, prodded, tested, and analyzed. Every conversation he has is about symptoms and treatments and medical possibilities. He's forgotten how to just be a teenager who happens to have health challenges." Marcus found himself leaning forward, genuinely interested despite his reservations. "My approach isn't about curing him," Isabella continued. "It's about helping him remember who he is beyond his illness. Sometimes when we stop fighting our bodies and start supporting them, remarkable things can happen. And the farmer's market trip, the cooking lessons, teaching him to nourish himself rather than just consume calories, giving him agency in his own care instead of being a passive recipient of medical interventions, helping him build confidence in his body's ability to do positive things, not just experience symptoms." That night, Marcus found himself reviewing security footage with new eyes. He watched Isabella guide Daniel through gentle stretching exercises, not as physical therapy, but as a way to thank his body for carrying him through difficult days. He saw her encourage Daniel to express frustration and fear instead of maintaining the brave face he'd worn for months around medical professionals. Surprisingly, he observed moments when Isabella clearly struggled with her own emotions. Late one afternoon, when Daniel had retreated to his room for a nap, the cameras captured Isabella sitting alone in the kitchen, her head in her hands, shoulders shaking with what appeared to be silent tears. Marcus realized that Isabella wasn't just professionally engaged with Daniel's situation. She was personally invested in a way that went beyond typical caregiver duties. The question was whether that level of emotional involvement was helpful or potentially problematic. The answer began to emerge during the 4th week, when Daniel experienced what Dr. Winters called his first significant improvement in months. His energy levels stabilized at a higher baseline. His cognitive fog lifted enough for him to start thinking about returning to school part-time. And most remarkably, his latest blood work showed several inflammatory markers moving in the right direction. "I don't want to get ahead of ourselves," Dr. Winters cautioned during their appointment, "but these are the most encouraging signs we've seen since Daniel's illness began." Marcus felt a surge of hope mixed with confusion. "What do you think is making the difference?" "Honestly, I'm not sure. His diet has improved significantly, he's more physically active within reasonable limits, and his psychological state seems much more positive. All of those factors can impact immune function, but usually not this dramatically." That evening, Marcus decided to have a more direct conversation with Isabella about her background and methods. But as he reviewed the day's security footage, in preparation, he noticed something that made him pause. At approximately 2:47 p.m., while Daniel was napping, Isabella had spent nearly an hour in his room. Not unusual in itself, she often organized his space or prepared materials for afternoon activities, but in this footage she appeared to be doing something with Daniel's prescription medications. Marcus enhanced the video quality and watched more carefully. Isabella was systematically going through Daniel's pill organizer, removing certain medications and replacing them with what appeared to be identical-looking capsules from a small bag she'd brought with her. Marcus's blood ran cold. Was Isabella secretly altering his son's medication regimen? Was that why Daniel was improving, because she was giving him something different or potentially dangerous? His first instinct was to confront her immediately, but his analytical mind urged caution. If Isabella was indeed tampering with medication, he needed solid evidence before making accusations. More importantly, he needed to understand what she was actually doing before potentially disrupting Daniel's improvement. That night, Marcus made a decision that would fundamentally change the trajectory of their story. Instead of confronting Isabella or calling the authorities, he decided to conduct his own investigation. He would use every resource at his disposal: enhanced security monitoring, private investigation services, and his own technological capabilities, to uncover the truth about Isabella Santos. But as he began his research, Marcus discovered that Isabella's background was far more complex and mysterious than he had imagined. Her references, while glowing, came from families dealing with remarkably similar situations to Daniel's. Teenage children with mysterious, treatment-resistant illnesses who had experienced dramatic improvements under Isabella's care. The pattern was too consistent to be coincidental, but it raised disturbing questions. Was Isabella somehow causing these illnesses in order to cure them and build her reputation? Was she running some kind of elaborate medical fraud? Or was there something else entirely happening? Something that might challenge everything Marcus thought he knew about medicine, healing, and the nature of his son's mysterious condition. As Marcus fell asleep that night, his mind was churning with possibilities, each more unsettling than the last. The young woman who had brought such positive change to his son's life might be hiding secrets that could destroy everything they had gained, or she might hold answers to questions he hadn't even known to ask. Tomorrow he would begin uncovering the truth about Isabella Santos, whatever the cost. Marcus spent the weekend in his home office like a man possessed, surrounded by multiple monitors, displaying everything from enhanced security footage to deep web background check services. His software engineering skills, honed through years of building complex systems, were now focused on a single target: unraveling the mystery of Isabella Santos. What he discovered in those first 48 hours of intensive research both alarmed and confused him. Isabella's digital footprint was remarkably clean, almost suspiciously so. Her social media presence was minimal, professional, and carefully curated. No wild college photos, no controversial opinions, no personal drama. For a 24-year-old, it felt unnaturally sanitized, but it was the deeper investigation that yielded the most disturbing information. Using his connections in the tech industry, Marcus had hired a discreet private investigation firm that specialized in background verification for high-security positions. Their preliminary report arrived via encrypted email Sunday evening. Subject has worked with 6 families in the past 3 years, the report stated. In all cases, families had children between ages 14-18 experiencing unexplained chronic illnesses. In all cases, significant improvement was documented during subjects' employment period. However, we've identified some concerning patterns. Marcus scrolled through the attached documentation, his unease growing with each page. The Morrison family in Sacramento, their 16-year-old daughter had suffered from debilitating fatigue and joint pain for over a year before Isabella's arrival. After 3 months of Isabella's care, the girl had returned to competitive swimming and maintained good health for the following year. The Rodriguez family in Fresno, their 15-year-old son, had experienced mysterious neurological symptoms that baffled specialists at UCSF. Isabella worked with the family for 4 months, after which the boy's symptoms resolved completely and he was accepted to a prestigious summer science program. Case after case followed the same pattern. Mysterious illnesses, failed conventional treatments, Isabella's intervention, remarkable recoveries, but buried in the investigators' notes were troubling details. In 3 of the 6 cases, other household staff had reported unusual activities during Isabella's employment. Medications being handled in ways that seemed inconsistent with prescribed protocols. Strange powders or liquids being added to food preparations. Late-night activities that Isabella claimed were energy clearing or environmental balancing. Most disturbing was a note from the Morrison family's former housekeeper who had been interviewed by the investigators. That girl knew things about the family she couldn't have known, personal things, medical things, and Sarah, the daughter, didn't just get better. She got better in exactly the ways Isabella predicted she would. Marcus leaned back in his chair, his mind reeling. Was Isabella some kind of medical savant with unconventional methods that actually worked? Or was she something far more sinister, someone who somehow caused illnesses in order to cure them and build her reputation? The medication tampering footage played on loop on one of his monitors. Marcus had enhanced it using professional video analysis software, and the details were unmistakable. Isabella was systematically replacing Daniel's prescribed medications with identical-looking capsules from her own supply. Monday morning brought a decision point. Marcus could confront Isabella directly, potentially disrupting Daniel's improvement. He could contact law enforcement, though he had no proof of actual wrongdoing. Or he could continue gathering evidence while monitoring the situation more closely. He chose a 4th option. Using his company's resources, Marcus had his IT team install additional, more sophisticated surveillance equipment throughout the house. Micro-cameras with enhanced audio, motion sensors that could detect the subtlest movements, even air quality monitors that could identify trace chemicals or compounds. "We're updating the security system," he told Isabella when she arrived Monday morning, gesturing to the technicians working throughout the house. "Just some routine upgrades." Isabella nodded casually, but Marcus noticed her eyes tracking the workers' movements with more attention than seemed natural. She was clearly cataloguing where the new equipment was being placed. That afternoon, while Daniel was at a follow-up appointment with Dr. Winters, Marcus decided to search Isabella's belongings. He felt like a criminal going through her purse and jacket, but his son's safety outweighed his discomfort with violating her privacy. What he found defied explanation. Isabella's purse contained the expected items: wallet, keys, phone, lip balm. But there was also a small leather journal filled with handwritten notes in what appeared to be multiple languages. Marcus recognized Spanish and English, but there were passages in scripts he couldn't identify. The English portions were particularly unsettling, Subject responds well to mineral rebalancing. Iron and B complex showing positive effects. Reduce inflammatory triggers through environmental modification. Family dynamics remain obstacle. Father's skepticism creating stress patterns that impede progress. Marcus felt his stomach drop. Isabella was documenting Daniel's treatment with clinical precision, using terminology that suggested far more medical knowledge than she'd claimed to possess. But what was mineral rebalancing? And what did she mean by environmental modification? He photographed several pages with his phone before carefully returning everything to its original position. As he closed Isabella's purse, his phone buzzed with a text from Daniel. Appointment went great. Dr. Winters says my latest blood work is the best it's been in months. Coming home now. The contradiction was maddening. Daniel was genuinely improving, dramatically and measurably. His energy levels were higher, his cognitive function had cleared significantly, and objective medical tests confirmed positive changes. If Isabella was responsible for this improvement, did it matter that her methods were unconventional or even deceptive? That evening, Marcus watched the new surveillance feeds with obsessive attention. The enhanced audio revealed conversations he'd never been able to hear before. Isabella spoke to Daniel not just about food and activities, but about emotions, fears, and hopes in ways that seemed almost therapeutic. Your body has been fighting for so long, he heard her say as they prepared dinner together. Sometimes we need to remind it how to rest, how to trust, how to heal. Do you really think I'm getting better? Daniel asked, his voice carrying a vulnerability that made Marcus's chest tight. I think you're remembering who you are, Isabella replied. The sickness tried to make you forget, but your true self is stronger than any illness. Marcus found himself moved, despite his suspicions. Isabella's care for Daniel seemed genuine, even if her methods were questionable. But the mystery of her background and the medication tampering couldn't be ignored. Late that night, after Isabella had left, and Daniel was sleeping, Marcus made a discovery that changed everything. His first instinct was to confront her immediately, but his analytical mind urged caution. If Isabella was indeed tampering with medication, he needed solid evidence before making accusations. More importantly, he needed to understand what she was actually doing before potentially disrupting Daniel's improvement. That night, Marcus made a decision that would fundamentally change the trajectory of their story. Instead of confronting Isabella or calling the authorities, he decided to conduct his own investigation. He would use every resource at his disposal: enhanced security monitoring, private investigation services, and his own technological capabilities, to uncover the truth about Isabella Santos. But as he began his research, Marcus discovered that Isabella's background was far more complex and mysterious than he had imagined. Her references, while glowing, came from families dealing with remarkably similar situations to Daniel's. Teenage children with mysterious, treatment-resistant illnesses who had experienced dramatic improvements under Isabella's care. The pattern was too consistent to be coincidental, but it raised disturbing questions. Was Isabella somehow causing these illnesses in order to cure them and build her reputation? Was she running some kind of elaborate medical fraud? Or was there something else entirely happening? Something that might challenge everything Marcus thought he knew about medicine, healing, and the nature of his son's mysterious condition. As Marcus fell asleep that night, his mind was churning with possibilities, each more unsettling than the last. The young woman who had brought such positive change to his son's life might be hiding secrets that could destroy everything they had gained, or she might hold answers to questions he hadn't even known to ask. Tomorrow he would begin uncovering the truth about Isabella Santos, whatever the cost. Marcus spent the weekend in his home office like a man possessed, surrounded by multiple monitors, displaying everything from enhanced security footage to deep web background check services. His software engineering skills, honed through years of building complex systems, were now focused on a single target: unraveling the mystery of Isabella Santos. What he discovered in those first 48 hours of intensive research both alarmed and confused him. Isabella's digital footprint was remarkably clean, almost suspiciously so. Her social media presence was minimal, professional, and carefully curated. No wild college photos, no controversial opinions, no personal drama. For a 24-year-old, it felt unnaturally sanitized, but it was the deeper investigation that yielded the most disturbing information. Using his connections in the tech industry, Marcus had hired a discreet private investigation firm that specialized in background verification for high-security positions. Their preliminary report arrived via encrypted email Sunday evening. Subject has worked with 6 families in the past 3 years, the report stated. In all cases, families had children between ages 14 and 18, experiencing unexplained chronic illnesses. In all cases, significant improvement was documented during subjects' employment period. However, we've identified some concerning patterns. Marcus scrolled through the attached documentation, his unease growing with each page. The Morrison family in Sacramento, their 16-year-old daughter had suffered from debilitating fatigue and joint pain for over a year before Isabella's arrival. After 3 months of Isabella's care, the girl had returned to competitive swimming and maintained good health for the following year. The Rodriguez family in Fresno, their 15-year-old son, had experienced mysterious neurological symptoms that baffled specialists at UCSF. Isabella worked with the family for 4 months, after which the boy's symptoms resolved completely and he was accepted to a prestigious summer science program. Case after case followed the same pattern: mysterious illnesses, failed conventional treatments, Isabella's intervention, remarkable recoveries, but buried in the investigators' notes were troubling details. In 3 of the 6 cases, other household staff had reported unusual activities during Isabella's employment, medications being handled in ways that seemed inconsistent with prescribed protocols, strange powders or liquids being added to food preparations, late-night activities that Isabella claimed were energy clearing or environmental balancing. Most disturbing was a note from the Morrison family's former housekeeper who had been interviewed by the investigators. That girl knew things about the family she couldn't have known, personal things, medical things, and Sarah, the daughter, didn't just get better. She got better in exactly the ways Isabella predicted she would. Marcus leaned back in his chair, his mind reeling. Was Isabella some kind of medical savant with unconventional methods that actually worked? Or was she something far more sinister, someone who somehow caused illnesses in order to cure them and build her reputation? The medication tampering footage played on loop on one of his monitors. Marcus had enhanced it using professional video analysis software, and the details were unmistakable. Isabella was systematically replacing Daniel's prescribed medications with identical-looking capsules from her own supply. Monday morning brought a decision point. Marcus could confront Isabella directly, potentially disrupting Daniel's improvement. He could contact law enforcement, though he had no proof of actual wrongdoing. Or he could continue gathering evidence while monitoring the situation more closely. He chose a 4th option. Using his company's resources, Marcus had his IT team install additional, more sophisticated surveillance equipment throughout the house. Micro cameras with enhanced audio, motion sensors that could detect the subtlest movements, even air quality monitors that could identify trace chemicals or compounds. "We're updating the security system," he told Isabella when she arrived Monday morning, gesturing to the technicians working throughout the house. "Just some routine upgrades." Isabella nodded casually, but Marcus noticed her eyes tracking the workers' movements with more attention than seemed natural. She was clearly cataloguing where the new equipment was being placed. That afternoon, while Daniel was at a follow-up appointment with Dr. Winters, Marcus decided to search Isabella's belongings. He felt like a criminal going through her purse and jacket, but his son's safety outweighed his discomfort with violating her privacy. What he found defied explanation. Isabella's purse contained the expected items: wallet, keys, phone, lip balm. But there was also a small leather journal filled with handwritten notes in what appeared to be multiple languages. Marcus recognized Spanish and English, but there were passages in scripts he couldn't identify. The English portions were particularly unsettling. Subject responds well to mineral rebalancing. Iron and B complex showing positive effects. Reduce inflammatory triggers through environmental modification. Family dynamics remain obstacle. Father's skepticism creating stress patterns that impede progress. Marcus felt his stomach drop. Isabella was documenting Daniel's treatment with clinical precision, using terminology that suggested far more medical knowledge than she'd claimed to possess. But what was mineral rebalancing? And what did she mean by environmental modification? He photographed several pages with his phone before carefully returning everything to its original position. As he closed Isabella's purse, his phone buzzed with a text from Daniel. Appointment went great. Dr. Winters says my latest blood work is the best it's been in months. Coming home now. The contradiction was maddening. Daniel was genuinely improving, dramatically and measurably. His energy levels were higher, his cognitive function had cleared significantly, and objective medical tests confirmed positive changes. If Isabella was responsible for this improvement, did it matter that her methods were unconventional or even deceptive? That evening, Marcus watched the new surveillance feeds with obsessive attention. The enhanced audio revealed conversations he'd never been able to hear before. Isabella spoke to Daniel not just about food and activities, but about emotions, fears, and hopes in ways that seemed almost therapeutic. Your body has been fighting for so long, he heard her say as they prepared dinner together. Sometimes we need to remind it how to rest, how to trust, how to heal. Do you really think I'm getting better? Daniel asked, his voice carrying a vulnerability that made Marcus's chest tight. I think you're remembering who you are, Isabella replied. The sickness tried to make you forget, but your true self is stronger than any illness. Marcus found himself moved, despite his suspicions. Isabella's care for Daniel seemed genuine, even if her methods were questionable. But the mystery of her background and the medication tampering couldn't be ignored. Late that night, after Isabella had left, and Daniel was sleeping, Marcus made a discovery that changed everything. I decided to learn everything I could about conditions like Daniel's, Isabella corrected. I spent 3 years studying under practitioners who work with treatment-resistant cases. I learned about nutritional medicine, environmental factors, alternative diagnostics. And yes, I learned about lithium supplementation for inflammatory conditions. But you're not a doctor. No, I'm not. But I've seen 15 young people like Daniel recover using approaches that conventional medicine doesn't embrace. I've also seen what happens when families wait for the medical system to catch up while their children suffer. Marcus ran his hands through his hair, feeling the weight of impossible choices. The lithium you've been giving him. Where did you get it? How do you know the dosage is safe? Isabella reached into her bag and pulled out a small notebook. I've been monitoring Daniel's response carefully. The lithium I've been using is pharmaceutical grade, obtained through a compound pharmacy that works with integrative physicians. The dosage is conservative, much lower than what's typically prescribed. For psychiatric conditions, she handed him the notebook. I've documented everything. His baseline measurements, daily observations, any changes in symptoms or behavior. I've also been in consultation with a physician who specializes in lithium treatment for inflammatory conditions. Marcus opened the notebook and found meticulous records spanning the entire time Isabella had been working with Daniel. Dosages, timing, observations, even notes about his mood and energy levels. It was more detailed than many medical charts he'd seen. Dr. Elena Vasquez in San Francisco, Isabella continued. She's been monitoring Daniel's case through me. She's the one who recommended the specific compound and dosing schedule. You've been working with a doctor this entire time? Dr. Vasquez couldn't treat Daniel directly without a proper referral and extensive medical history review, but she was willing to provide guidance for supportive care while we worked to build a case for official treatment. Marcus felt like he was standing in an elevator that kept changing directions. Why didn't you tell me any of this? Isabella's expression grew sad. Because parents in your situation usually respond exactly as you're responding now. Fear, anger, accusations of endangering their child. Most people prefer the illusion of safety that comes with conventional treatment, even when that treatment isn't working. So, you decided to treat my son in secret and hope I wouldn't find out? I decided to help your son get better and deal with the consequences when the time came. Isabella's voice carried a quiet conviction that was difficult to argue with. Daniel was deteriorating. Every day we waited was another day of unnecessary suffering. Marcus stared at the notebook in his hands, then at the young woman who had potentially saved his son's life while betraying his trust in the most fundamental way possible. What happens now? He asked finally. Isabella stood up. Now you have to decide whether Daniel's recovery is worth the risk of continuing treatment that's working, or whether your need for control is more important than his health. The bluntness of her statement was like a slap, but Marcus recognized the truth. In it, his son was better, dramatically, measurably better. The question was whether he could accept healing that came through methods he couldn't control or fully understand. I need time to think, Marcus said. Isabella nodded. Of course. But while you're thinking, remember that Daniel still needs support. The lithium treatment isn't something that can be stopped abruptly without medical supervision. As she reached the door, Isabella turned back. And Marcus, your son is going to be fine. The worst is behind him now. After she left, Marcus sat, alone in his study, surrounded by monitors and data and the tools of his analytical trade. But for the first time in his career, the answer to his most important problem couldn't be found in code or logic or systematic analysis. It would require something much more difficult: trust. The next 24 hours were the longest of Marcus's life. Isabella hadn't returned after their confrontation, leaving Marcus alone with Daniel and a decision that felt impossible to make. The house seemed different without her presence, quieter, but not in a peaceful way. It was the kind of silence that preceded storms, Daniel noticed immediately. He emerged from his room Thursday morning looking more tired than he had in weeks, the brightness in his eyes dimmed by confusion and worry. "Where's Isabella?" he asked, settling carefully into his usual spot at the kitchen counter where she typically prepared their morning routine. Marcus fumbled with the coffee maker, buying time he didn't have. We had some disagreements about your treatment. She's taking a day off while we figure things out." Daniel's face fell. What kind of disagreements? Marcus had rehearsed this conversation in his head dozens of times during the sleepless night, but none of his prepared explanations felt adequate. How do you tell your 17-year-old son that the person who helped him heal was essentially practicing medicine without a license? How do you explain that the improvement he's experienced might be built on a foundation of deception? Dr. Winters found some things in your blood work that concerned her, Marcus said carefully. Things that shouldn't be there unless you were taking specific medications. Daniel was quiet for a long moment, processing this information with the intelligence that his illness had never diminished, "The supplements Isabella gives me," he said finally. "They're not just herbs and vitamins, are they?" Marcus felt a stab of admiration for his son's perceptiveness, mixed with guilt for the position he'd put him in. "No, son, they're not. But I feel better than I have in months," Daniel said, his voice taking on an edge of desperation. "Whatever she's been giving me, it's working. I can think clearly. I have energy. I can imagine going back to school. Why is that a bad thing?" The question cut to the heart of Marcus's dilemma. In any rational analysis, Daniel's improvement was undeniably positive. His blood work showed reduced inflammation, his energy levels were stable, his cognitive function had returned to near normal levels. If Isabella's treatment was responsible for these changes, then she had accomplished what a team of specialists couldn't. But the means mattered, didn't they? The deception, the risk, the fundamental violation of trust and medical ethics. These couldn't simply be overlooked because the outcome was positive. Marcus's phone rang, interrupting his internal struggle. The caller ID showed Dr. Winter's office. "Mr. Chen, this is Dr. Winters. I've been thinking about our conversation yesterday, and I'd like to discuss some options for Daniel's care going forward." "What kind of options?" "I've been researching lithium protocols for cases like Daniel's. There's actually growing evidence for its effectiveness in certain inflammatory conditions. If we can establish proper medical supervision and monitoring, it might be possible to continue this treatment legally and safely." Marcus felt something like relief flooding through him. "You mean Daniel could keep taking the lithium?" "Under proper medical protocols, yes. I'd want to work with a specialist who has experience with this type of treatment, and we'd need comprehensive monitoring, but it's not impossible." After ending the call, Marcus found Daniel in the living room, staring out the window toward the garden where he and Isabella had spent so many hours together. "Dr. Winters thinks there might be a way to continue the treatment you've been getting," Marcus said. "With proper medical supervision this time." Daniel turned to him, hope and skepticism warring in his expression. "What about Isabella?" That was the question Marcus had been avoiding. Even if they could continue Daniel's treatment through legitimate medical channels, what role would Isabella play? Could he trust her after she'd deceived him so fundamentally? Could Daniel continue to benefit from her care, knowing that their entire relationship was built on medical fraud? The answer came from an unexpected source. That afternoon, Marcus's phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "This is Dr. Elena Vasquez. Isabella gave me your contact information. I believe we need to talk." An hour later, Marcus found himself on a video call with a woman who looked nothing like his mental image of someone who would engage in questionable medical practices. Dr. Vasquez appeared to be in her 50s, with graying hair and the kind of professional bearing that suggested decades of legitimate medical experience. "Mr. Chen, I want to start by saying that Isabella acted against my explicit advice when she began treating your son without your knowledge," Dr. Vasquez began. "I told her repeatedly that what she was proposing was ethically problematic and potentially dangerous." Marcus felt his anger reigniting. "Then why did you help her?" "Because Isabella presented me with detailed documentation of a young man who was deteriorating rapidly while receiving inadequate care. When she described Daniel's symptoms and showed me his medical history, I recognized a condition I've successfully treated in other patients." Dr. Vasquez leaned forward, her expression intense. "Mr. Chen, your son likely has a rare inflammatory condition that affects the mitochondrial function in his cells. It's not well recognized by mainstream medicine yet, which is why his doctors haven't been able to help him. But I've seen dozens of cases, and I know how to treat it. With lithium is one component, yes, but it's part of a comprehensive protocol that includes specific nutritional support, environmental modifications, and careful monitoring. Isabella has been implementing exactly the treatment I would have prescribed if I'd been able to see Daniel. As a patient, Marcus struggled to process this information. So you're saying she was right? I'm saying she was right about the treatment, but wrong about the method. What she did was dangerous and unethical, regardless of the outcome. Then what happens now? Dr. Vasquez was quiet for a moment. Now we have several options. I can work with Dr. Winters to establish a proper treatment protocol for Daniel. I can provide the medical supervision that ensures his safety. And if you're willing, Isabella can continue providing the supportive care that's been so beneficial to him, but under proper medical oversight this time. You're suggesting I should trust her again? I'm suggesting you consider whether your son's health is more important than your wounded pride. The bluntness of the statement echoed Isabella's words from the day before, and Marcus realized he was facing the same fundamental choice from multiple directions. That evening, Daniel made the decision for him. Marcus found his son in the kitchen, attempting to prepare the herbal tea Isabella usually made for him in the evenings. The process was clearly unfamiliar to him, and the result smelled nothing like Isabella's carefully crafted blend. "It doesn't taste right," Daniel said, disappointment evident in his voice. "I don't know what she puts in it, but this isn't even close." Marcus watched his son struggle with something that had become routine and realized how much of Daniel's improvement depended not just on the medications Isabella had been providing, but on her knowledge, her care, and her understanding of his specific needs. "Dad," Daniel said quietly, "I know Isabella lied to you. I know what she did was wrong, but she's the first person in 8 months who made me feel like I was going to be okay." Marcus sat down beside his son. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying I want her back, not because I need someone to take care of me, but because she understands how to help me take care of myself." Daniel turned to face his father directly. "You've spent months trying to find someone who could fix me. Isabella didn't try to fix me. She helped me remember how to be myself again." That night, Marcus made a series of phone calls that would reshape their entire situation. First to Dr. Winters, then to Dr. Vasquez, and finally to Isabella. "I want to try again," he told Isabella when she answered. "But this time we do everything legitimately. Dr. Vasquez will supervise your work with Daniel, Dr. Winters will monitor his medical progress, and you'll be completely transparent about every aspect of his treatment. And you'll be able to trust someone who betrayed your confidence?" Marcus had thought about this question extensively. "I'll be able to trust someone who put my son's well-being ahead of her own safety, even when it meant risking everything she'd worked for." There was a long pause before Isabella responded. "When would you like me to start?" "Tomorrow," Marcus said. "Daniel's been trying to make your evening tea. It's terrible." For the first time in days, Marcus heard Isabella laugh. The next morning brought a different kind of beginning. Isabella arrived not as a secret caregiver operating in the shadows, but as part of a legitimate medical team working to help Daniel heal. Dr. Vasquez participated via video call. Dr. Winters reviewed all treatment protocols, and Marcus watched everything with full knowledge and consent. The dynamic was different, more formal, more structured, but the core relationship between Isabella and Daniel remained unchanged. She still approached his care with the same gentle wisdom that had sparked his initial recovery. The difference was that now everyone understood exactly what they were working toward and why. But even as they established this new normal, Marcus knew their story was far from over. Trust, once broken, isn't easily rebuilt. And the questions surrounding Isabella's past, the other families, the pattern of mysterious illnesses, the almost supernatural ability to know exactly what each child needed, remained unanswered. Marcus watched Isabella guide Daniel through his morning routine under Dr. Vasquez's supervision. He realized that choosing to trust her again wasn't an ending. It was the beginning of a much more complex journey toward understanding what healing really meant and whether some forms of help were worth the risks they carried. 3 weeks into their new arrangement, Marcus thought he had found his equilibrium. Daniel's treatment was proceeding under proper medical supervision. Isabella's methods were transparent and documented, and the family had settled into a routine that felt both healing and honest. Then, Marcus received a phone call that shattered his newfound peace. "Mr. Chen, this is Detective Sarah Rodriguez with the Fresno Police Department. I understand you've employed someone named Isabella Santos." Marcus felt his stomach drop. "Yes, she works with my son. Is there a problem?" "We're investigating some irregularities related to her previous employment. Would you be available for a conversation today?" The drive to Fresno took 2 hours, during which Marcus's mind raced through every possible scenario. He hadn't told Daniel or Isabella about the call, partly because he wasn't sure what it meant, and partly because he was terrified of disrupting Daniel's progress again. Detective Rodriguez was a compact woman in her 40s, with intelligent eyes and the kind of direct manner that suggested she dealt with every form of human deception. Her office was spartanly decorated except for commendations on the wall and family photos on her desk. "Mr. Chen, let me start by saying this isn't a criminal investigation," she began. "At least not yet, but we've received some concerning reports about Isabella Santos, and your name came up in our research." Marcus leaned forward. "What kind of reports?" "Are you familiar with the Hartwell family? They employed Isabella about 2 years ago for their daughter Emma." Marcus nodded. The Hartwells had been mentioned in his private investigator's report, another family with a mysteriously ill teenager who recovered under Isabella's care. "Emma Hartwell died last month," Detective Rodriguez said quietly. The words hit Marcus like a physical blow. "What? But I was told she recovered completely." "She did. Emma was healthy for almost 18 months after Isabella's employment ended. She returned to school, played volleyball, was accepted to UC Davis. Then suddenly, her symptoms returned. Aggressively, Detective Rodriguez opened a file folder. Emma was hospitalized 3 times in the past 6 months. Each time her condition worsened. The doctors couldn't understand what was happening. Her previous recovery had been so complete that they'd removed her from all monitoring protocols." Marcus felt nauseous. "How did she die?" "Organ failure. Her immune system essentially turned on itself with unprecedented violence. The attending physician said they'd never seen anything like it." "And you think Isabella was somehow responsible?" Detective Rodriguez studied Marcus carefully. "That's what we're trying to determine. Emma's parents are convinced that whatever Isabella did to help their daughter initially created some kind of dependency. They believe that when Isabella's influence was removed, Emma's body couldn't maintain its recovery." Marcus struggled to process this information. "But that doesn't make sense. Isabella worked with Emma for only 4 months, and she was healthy for over a year afterward. Unless," Detective Rodriguez said, "Isabella's treatment created changes that required ongoing maintenance, changes that the family wasn't aware of and the medical system couldn't support." The implication was terrifying. Marcus thought about Daniel's dramatic improvement, his renewed energy and health. What if it was temporary? What if removing Isabella's care would trigger a catastrophic relapse? "There's more," Detective Rodriguez continued. "We've identified 2 other families where similar patterns occurred. Children who experienced remarkable recoveries under Isabella's care, followed by severe relapses months or years later." Marcus felt the room spinning slightly. "Are you saying Isabella is somehow harming these children?" "I'm saying we don't understand what Isabella is doing, and the long-term consequences appear to be unpredictable." Detective Rodriguez leaned back in her chair. "Mr. Chen, Has your son shown any signs of dependency on Isabella's presence? Any anxiety about her leaving or changes to his routine? Marcus's mind flashed to Daniel's distress when Isabella had been absent for just one day. The way his son seemed to wilt without her presence, the immediate improvement when she returned. He'd attributed it to emotional attachment, but what if it was something more? "I need to ask you directly," Detective Rodriguez said. "Are you willing to cooperate with our investigation? We'd like to monitor Isabella's activities and document her methods." Marcus felt trapped between impossible choices. Cooperating with the investigation might help protect other families, but it would mean deceiving Isabella and potentially disrupting Daniel's treatment. Not cooperating might make him complicit. If Isabella was indeed causing harm. "I need time to think," Marcus said finally. The drive home was a blur of conflicting thoughts and growing panic. By the time Marcus reached Palo Alto, he had made a decision that felt both necessary and terrible. He would investigate Isabella himself. That evening, Marcus watched the security feeds with new eyes, looking for signs he might have missed. Isabella's interactions with Daniel appeared unchanged. Gentle, supportive, focused on building his independence rather than creating dependency. But Detective Rodriguez's words echoed in his mind. The long-term consequences appear to be unpredictable. Marcus began researching the families Detective Rodriguez had mentioned. Online obituaries, social media posts, medical forum discussions. The pattern was heartbreakingly consistent. Children with mysterious illnesses, remarkable recoveries under Isabella's care, periods of sustained health, then sudden, catastrophic relapses. But as Marcus dug deeper, he discovered something the detective hadn't mentioned. In each case, the families had made significant changes to their children's care after Isabella left. Different doctors, altered medication protocols, environmental changes. The relapses hadn't occurred in isolation. They had coincided with disruptions to the foundational lifestyle changes Isabella had established. Marcus's phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "We need to talk. Tonight. Come alone." The message included an address in San Francisco. Against his better judgment, Marcus drove to the address, which turned out to be a small cafe in the Mission District that had closed hours earlier. Isabella was waiting outside, her usual calm, demeanor replaced by visible anxiety. "You talked to the police," she said without preamble. Marcus didn't bother denying it. "Emma Hartwell is dead." Isabella's face crumpled slightly before she regained her composure. "Emma stopped following the protocol 6 months after I left her care. Her parents thought she was cured and gradually returned to all the lifestyle factors that had made her sick initially. So her death was the family's fault. Her death was a tragedy that might have been prevented if I'd been allowed to provide proper follow-up care." Isabella's voice carried a pain that Marcus hadn't heard before. "But her parents were uncomfortable with my methods and wanted to return to conventional medical management." Marcus studied Isabella's face in the dim streetlight. "Are you saying that children you help need ongoing care to maintain their recovery?" "I'm saying that the conditions I treat aren't like broken bones that heal and stay healed. They're complex, systemic imbalances that require ongoing attention and support." Isabella sat down on the cafe's front steps, suddenly looking much younger than her 24 years. "Marcus, I don't cure these children. I teach their bodies how to function properly again. But that requires maintaining the conditions that support healthy function. Why didn't you tell me this?" "Because families hear ongoing care and they panic. They think it means their child will never be truly well, that they'll be dependent on treatments forever." Isabella looked up at him. "But the truth is, everyone needs ongoing care. We just usually call it nutrition, exercise, stress management, and regular medical checkups." Marcus felt a new kind of fear settling in his chest. "What happens to Daniel if you leave?" Isabella was quiet for a long moment. If we transition him properly, work with Dr. Vasquez to establish sustainable protocols, and ensure his family understands how to maintain the lifestyle changes that support his health, he should continue to thrive. And if we don't, then he'll probably experience some regression. How severe depends on how quickly the supportive factors are removed and whether conventional medicine can adapt to maintain what we've established. Marcus sat down beside Isabella on the steps. The detective thinks you're some kind of predator who makes children dependent on you. And what do you think? Marcus considered the question seriously. I think you're someone with knowledge that conventional medicine doesn't understand yet. But I also think you're carrying secrets that could destroy families if they're not handled properly. Isabella nodded slowly. You're right, and that's why I need to tell you something else. Marcus braced himself for another revelation. Dr. Vasquez isn't the only physician I work with. There's a network of doctors and researchers who are studying the conditions I treat. We're documenting everything, trying to understand why some children develop these systemic imbalances and how to prevent them. You're part of a research study. More than that, we're trying to establish protocols that conventional medicine can adopt. The goal is to make people like me unnecessary. Marcus felt something shift in his understanding of Isabella's work. How many children are you treating? Currently? 12. But we've successfully transitioned 8 families to independent management over the past 2 years. Emma's case was an exception. As they sat in the cool San Francisco evening, Marcus realized that his family had become part of something much larger and more complex than he'd imagined. Isabella wasn't just caring for Daniel. She was pioneering treatments that could help countless other families facing similar mysterious illnesses. But she was also carrying the weight of every case where the transition hadn't gone smoothly, every family that had lost trust in her methods, every child whose improvement had been temporary. "What do you need from me?" Marcus asked finally. Isabella turned to look at him directly. "I need you to trust that I'm telling you the truth now, and I need you to help me figure out how to protect Daniel, while also protecting the other families who are counting on this research." Marcus thought about Detective Rodriguez's investigation, about the families who blamed Isabella for their children's relapses, about his own son's dramatic improvement and the terrifying possibility that it might not last. "If we do this right," Isabella continued, "Daniel could be one of the first cases where we demonstrate that sustainable recovery is possible. But if we get it wrong—" She didn't need to finish the sentence. Marcus understood the stakes now, and they were higher than he'd ever imagined. The resolution came faster than Marcus expected, triggered by an event that would reshape everything he thought he knew about his son's illness and Isabella's work. 2 days after his meeting with Isabella in San Francisco, Marcus received an urgent call from Dr. Vasquez. "Marcus, I need you and Daniel to come to my clinic immediately and bring Isabella. We've had a breakthrough that changes everything." The drive to San Francisco was tense. Daniel sensed the gravity of the situation, though Marcus had only told him that Dr. Vasquez had important test results to discuss. Isabella sat in the passenger seat, her usual calm replaced by visible nervousness. "Whatever happens today," she said quietly as they pulled into the clinic parking lot, "I want you to know that helping Daniel has been the most meaningful work of my life." Dr. Vasquez's clinic was nothing like the sterile medical facilities Marcus had grown accustomed to during Daniel's illness. The space felt more like a comfortable home, with warm lighting, plants, and the kind of atmosphere that promoted healing rather than clinical detachment. "Please, all of you sit down," Dr. Vasquez said, gesturing to a comfortable seating area in her office. "What I'm about to share will be difficult to process, but it's information that could save lives." She pulled out a thick folder and several computer printouts. "Daniel, with your permission, I've been analyzing your case as part of a larger research study. What we've discovered explains not only your recovery, but also the tragic outcomes in some of Isabella's previous cases." Marcus felt his heart rate accelerating. "What kind of discovery?" Dr. Vasquez looked directly at Daniel. "You don't have an autoimmune condition or a rare inflammatory disease. You have a very specific form of chronic heavy metal poisoning." The room fell silent. Marcus stared at Dr. Vasquez, struggling to process her words. "That's impossible," Marcus said finally. "Daniel has been tested for everything: environmental toxins, heavy metals, exposure to chemicals. Everything came back normal. Standard heavy metal testing looks for acute exposure," Dr. Vasquez explained. "What Daniel has is chronic low-level exposure to a very specific combination of metals that don't show up in conventional screenings unless you know exactly what to look for." She handed Marcus a detailed lab report. "We've identified elevated levels of mercury, lead, and aluminum in Daniel's system, but in patterns that suggest ongoing exposure rather than a single contamination event." Daniel leaned forward, his face pale. "How is that possible? I haven't been exposed to anything unusual." Dr. Vasquez turned to Isabella. This is where Isabella's intuitive approach proved correct, even though she didn't understand the mechanism. "Isabella, tell them about the water." Isabella's eyes widened. "The first week I was here, I noticed that the water from the kitchen tap tasted metallic. I started giving Daniel filtered water and using it for all his food preparation." "And the air quality modifications you made?" "I brought in specific plants that help filter indoor air. I also suggested Marcus have the HVAC system cleaned because the house felt heavy somehow." Dr. Vasquez nodded. "Marcus, when was the last time you had your home's water system and air quality professionally tested?" Marcus felt a cold realization settling in. "We've never had comprehensive testing. The house was built 5 years ago with all new systems. New construction can sometimes have issues that don't manifest immediately," Dr. Vasquez explained, "particularly in homes with complex water filtration systems and modern HVAC networks." She pulled out another set of test results. "I took the liberty of having samples from your home analyzed by a specialized environmental lab. Your water supply has been contaminated by corroded pipes in the filtration system, and your HVAC system was circulating air that had been passing through ductwork with degraded sealing compounds." Marcus stared at the reports, his mind reeling. "You're saying my house was poisoning my son?" "Very slowly, and at levels that wouldn't cause immediate symptoms. But over months, the cumulative effect would create exactly the kind of systemic inflammation and immune dysfunction Daniel experienced." Daniel's voice was barely a whisper. "So, I was never really sick? I mean, not with a disease?" "You were very sick," Dr. Vasquez assured him. "Heavy metal toxicity is extremely serious and can cause permanent damage if not addressed. But it's also completely treatable once properly identified." Isabella spoke for the first time since they'd arrived. "The lithium wasn't just treating inflammation. It was helping Daniel's body eliminate the metals more efficiently." Dr. Vasquez nodded. "Lithium has chelating properties that help bind and remove heavy metals from the body. Combined with the environmental modifications Isabella made and the nutritional support she provided, Daniel's system was finally able to start healing." Marcus felt overwhelming relief mixed with anger. 8 months. My son suffered for 8 months because no one thought to test our home environment. "To be fair," Dr. Vasquez said gently, "this type of contamination is rare, and the symptoms mimic so many other conditions that environmental causes are often overlooked." She opened another folder. But here's the crucial part that explains what happened to Emma Hartwell and the other children. Marcus braced himself for more difficult news. Emma's family had a similar environmental contamination issue, but after Isabella's treatment ended, they never addressed the source. Emma got better temporarily because the chelation therapy removed the metals from her system, but she was still being exposed daily to the same toxins. Dr. Vasquez's expression grew somber. When I reviewed Emma's case files, I found that her family had returned to their original living situation without any environmental modifications. Over time, the metals built up in her system again, but by then, her body's detoxification pathways were damaged from the initial exposure. When the poisoning returned, it was more severe than before. Isabella's eyes filled with tears. If I had known, if I had been able to explain what was really happening. You couldn't have known, Dr. Vasquez said firmly. We've only recently developed the testing protocols that allowed us to identify this specific pattern. Emma's death wasn't your fault, Isabella. It was a tragic consequence of incomplete understanding. Marcus looked at his son, who was processing this information with remarkable maturity. Daniel, how do you feel about all this? Daniel was quiet for a moment. I feel grateful and angry, but mostly grateful. He looked at Isabella. You saved my life even though you didn't know exactly how you were doing it. Isabella reached over and squeezed Daniel's hand. You saved yourself by being strong enough to fight through it until we figured out what was wrong. Dr. Vasquez leaned forward. There's one more thing. Marcus, we need to immediately address the contamination in your home. Daniel's recovery will only be sustainable if the environmental factors are eliminated. Of course, whatever it takes. And Isabella, I'd like to offer you a position with our research team. Your intuitive diagnostic abilities combined with proper scientific training could help us identify and treat cases like this much more quickly. Isabella looked stunned. You're offering me a job? I'm offering you the chance to turn your gifts into a systematic approach that could help hundreds of families. No more working in secret, no more risking everything to help children. You'd be part of a legitimate medical team. Marcus felt something shift in the room's atmosphere. After months of uncertainty, deception and fear, they were finally moving towards something that felt like resolution. What about the police investigation? Marcus asked. Dr. Vasquez smiled. I'll be calling Detective Rodriguez today with our findings. When she understands what really happened to Emma and the other children, I suspect her investigation will shift toward helping other families identify environmental contamination. 3 months later, Marcus stood in his completely renovated kitchen, watching Daniel and Isabella prepare dinner together. The house had been gutted and rebuilt with state-of-the-art air and water filtration systems. Daniel's latest blood work showed no trace of heavy metals, and his energy levels were higher than they'd been since before the illness began. Isabella had started working with Dr. Vasquez's research team 3 days a week, while continuing to support Daniel's transition to independence. She was also enrolled in a graduate program in environmental medicine, building on her intuitive abilities with scientific training. Dad, try this, Daniel said, offering Marcus a spoonful of soup. They'd been perfecting. Isabella says the recipe is almost ready to share with Dr. Vasquez's other patients. Marcus tasted the soup, noting how much more complex Daniel's palate had become since learning to cook with Isabella. It's perfect. As they sat down for dinner, Marcus reflected on how dramatically their lives had changed. Daniel was preparing to return to school full-time in the fall. Isabella had found a career path that honored her gifts while providing the scientific foundation she'd been missing. And Marcus had learned that sometimes the most important solutions come from people who think differently about problems. You know what's strange? Daniel said, as they cleaned up after dinner. "I'm actually grateful I got sick." Marcus and Isabella both looked at him in surprise. "I mean, I wouldn't want to go through it again," Daniel continued, "but it taught me things about my body, about health, about what really matters, and it brought Isabella into our lives." Isabella smiled, the kind of gentle expression that had first made Marcus trust her despite his skepticism. "And it taught your father that healing sometimes requires letting go of control." Marcus laughed, recognizing the truth in her observation. "It taught me that the most important questions aren't always answerable with data and algorithms." 6 months later, Daniel was not only back in school, but serving as a peer educator for Dr. Vasquez's environmental health program, sharing his story with other families facing mysterious illnesses. Isabella had become a certified environmental health specialist and was developing protocols that combined traditional medical testing with the intuitive assessment techniques that had saved Daniel's life. Marcus had funded the establishment of a new clinic that specialized in environmental health testing for families with unexplained chronic illnesses. The clinic's waiting list was 6 months long, filled with families whose children had been struggling with symptoms that conventional medicine couldn't explain, and Detective Rodriguez had become an unexpected ally, working with the research team to identify other cases where environmental contamination might be mistaken for mysterious diseases. The cameras that had once surveilled Isabella's every move now documented her training sessions with medical students, teaching them to look beyond symptoms to environmental causes. The same technology Marcus had used to investigate whether Isabella could be trusted now served to share her knowledge with healthcare providers around the world. But perhaps the most important change was the simplest one. In a house where fear and illness had once dominated every conversation, Daniel's laughter could be heard daily, echoing through rooms that had been restored not just physically, but emotionally. Marcus realized that the truth the cameras had revealed wasn't about Isabella's deception or hidden agenda. The truth was about trust, healing, and the courage to believe that sometimes the most important solutions come from the most unexpected sources. And in the end, that truth had saved not just Daniel's life, but all their lives in ways Marcus was still discovering. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.